their fundamentals and their advanced techniques have just in this project blended into the perfect mix. It didn't blow me away necessarily the same intensity as some of his other work, but it blew me in a way where I'm like, that is good. When you don't acutely notice what's so great about it, that's when you know it's a good video. Roger Deakins said it best, cinematographer. I said this on the show a million times. The best cinematography in the world is the cinematography you don't notice.
What's new in your world? We haven't talked since this morning, so
I haven't heard anything since this morning. It's been good. Just really so much work, man. It's been just a little overwhelming adjusting, and we just got out of our stay-at-home lockdown here in Toronto, and then around the rumor mill, and it's pretty public knowledge now, they're probably going to go back into the stay-at-home order after about just 2 weeks out of it. We're going to go back into it next Monday. So
that's not so great.
It's really horrible.
Not fun.
Like horrible because I need to be out. I'm a kinetic guy. I need to be like touching and moving and doing things. So I don't know what that does for the shooting. I guess sports can't like get together and stuff, which will kind of hurt some of the work I'm doing with Gladiator. We have so many plans, but like it's just they keep getting axed. And it makes me think, and this is a sick transition. Today we wanted to talk about the Grammys and what Gibson Hazard, Jack Bannon, all these guys did. It makes you think it's almost like the best work to do is kind of in music, not live, but like in those creative fields where you can get small crews, you can get locations where you can, block off. You can control a lot, and it's not really dictated by the government. So that's my little half-assed failed transition into going into the Grammy stuff, which we wanted to break down today.
I feel like anytime that Gibson Hazard drops a new project, we're just all over it, and rightfully so. I mean, he's him.
I mean, is he not like single-handedly kind of pioneered himself as like the first digital creator auteur, where it's like you watch a Jack Bannon video, a Gibson Hazard video, and you're like, it's Gibson Hazard. Like, how many digital creators, I guess you can't say he's digital anymore, but like, how many creators are out there that spawned from the internet that are like legit auteurs?
I don't know, man. I think he's kind of in a class of his own. I think it's crazy to see how much he's done with how old he is. Like, he can't be more than 22, 23, I want to say.
He must be. Well, I know Jack Bannon, his friend, is 21. Like, these guys are crazy. Young.
Still such a puppy and already working with NBA players and major artists. I mean, it's just crazy to see that progression.
Like the Grammys, that's such a huge deal. Like, I mean, how many creative agencies have really worked on the Grammys? I would assume, I don't know if they change it up every year, but he's a solo guy. I don't know if he has a company, but like just to like beat out all those other companies that have been in the game forever and be this fresh new look and like kill it the way he did, it's incredible. And like, before I want to jump into talking about the content itself, like this is a bit more in the clouds conversation. Like, I was actually talking about this with Ryan Ward. We had him on the pod a few weeks ago or a month ago or something. And we were just talking about like, how much is him getting really good fast, not just about hard work and like, just like always trying to be the best at what you do, versus like having a community of guys like Jack Bannon, Grow Up Brendan is another guy that he works with. Like, all these guys are so like-minded. They always hang out together. I don't know if they live together, but I know they spend a lot of time together. And it makes me think, through osmosis and through hanging out with these people in real life.
Big word.
You just gain so much knowledge and you learn so quick. And I'm going on a tangent here, but it's not just like, Will, you're hanging out with us now. Why don't you come and check out what I'm working on? It's like, it's more like just through how they talk, how they think about the projects, what they're wearing, what they're watching. Like, it's just their lifestyle, these incredible people, it like bleeds into yours the more you hang out with them. And I'd imagine just, it begs the question, how much luck goes into being really skilled and really good in whatever craft you're in? Like, if you're an athlete, how much is it luck that you got into that training program with that coach, with these other players who push you further? I know I'm going on.
It's a big part of it. It's a huge part of it.
Like, he got lucky and met those people to work with and worked hard as fuck.
Part of it as well is that like there's like a reason why people move out to LA. Like, LA's greatest export is like this culture within it. And I feel like I've heard, like, I can't speak to it. I've never been to LA, but I hear big influencers talk about how it doesn't matter if you're working at Starbucks as a barista or whether you have 3 million followers on YouTube. Like, everyone's got something out there. And I feel like that just bleeds through. And then locally, I think we're starting to see that in the very early stages with Toronto. I mean, like, a guy like Sam Colder came out of Toronto. Like, Drake really put the city on a map with what he's done in music and culture and basketball. But Toronto's kind of catching up in that way. And it's so interesting to see, as somebody who just associated Toronto with a place that I just kind of loved going to and visiting. Like, I grew up in a small town, so it was just kind of like the biggest attraction that we could go to. But now it's become so much more than that. And it's been so cool to see, as somebody who lived in Toronto for 4 years, but also still, like, in some ways still considers themselves an outsider of the city, and just like somebody who like just came here and met all these cool creative people. And I think what you're really speaking to is that your environment matters so much no matter what you're doing. Like, athletes become elite athletes because they hang around people that are better than them. They hang around coaches and mentors and people that can guide them along that way. And I think one of the struggles with creative people is that you kind of isolate it's so easy to isolate yourself and just do the work and not kind of go out and explore and find like-minded people. But that's such a big part of it. Like, you need systems around, you need people, you need mentors, you need information, you need community, just to feel alive. And that's something that I would like to hear you talk about with, like, in the first year and a half, we can call it, of school. Like, you were not kind of, well, I can't really speak to what you weren't or were not doing.
It wasn't really around. Like,
yeah, that's the nice way of saying it. So what changed when you started making an effort and you got more involved in the like kind of second stage of school? Like, what happened there, and like kind of what motivated that?
Like, initially I was just kind of on my own. I worked with Max a couple times, just with, like, not a couple times, like, I'd kind of work with him, but he was never like in my space.
He's not like a technical, super creative guy. He's a great guy to hang out with, but not for that reason.
And he's a good writer, and he's good at storytelling. Like, that's what he's good at. At the beginning, I was just kind of isolated, and like, I'm an only child. Like, I kind of like being on my own and kind of being in control in that regard. But it just slows down your progress. Like, you're not going to get that good that quick. And I remember when we first started hanging out, it wasn't so much that I was learning a lot from you. That came, but the main thing I remember is like working beside each other, and like, I just wouldn't stop. I would take less breaks. I was going longer. I was feeling more motivated because I could see you putting in the work beside me. And there was that pressure, like, oh, I'm not going to go for lunch. I'm not going to go take that break or do that thing, because like, he's still going, and I would just go longer. So for me, meeting you or meeting another creative person, it first started pushing me past my limits of output. And then it started transitioning as we became closer. We would just talk about things. And it wasn't like a specific project. Oh, how do you help me with this thing? It's like just the language you used, like the philosophies we talked about, the rhetoric just kind of built up. It changed the way I look at things. And it helped me get better, faster at being creative and understanding like the business side as well. So it leads me to the second point I wanted to make about being around the right people. It's like, it's so easy to say, put yourself around like-minded people, put yourself around mentors and whatnot. But the only way that works, I believe, is if like you can actually hang out on a human level. Like, you don't make a phone call and it's like, hey, let's talk about work, or let's hang out and we're only talking about work. It's like, you got to be going to like breakfast or lunch together, or dinner, or maybe you go to like a party together, or maybe you go to the gym together. There's like things you do in life that you both can relate on and just hang there. And through that, you build this relationship where you're more open to sharing. You actually probably are going to talk about work in those situations that aren't work centric, and just things just like bleed out onto you creatively. Like, I bet you these Jack Bannon, Brandon, and Gibson Hazard, they don't just work together. Like, they're also just like traveling and hanging together, and you learn from that. You learn like a philosophy and way to life that is conducive with being successful and creative just through hanging. That's what fascinates me the most. So you got to be a good guy. That's the thing. Be a fucking cool guy to hang out with.
If you take away one thing from this podcast, it's be a good guy. I started my career working on a pretty big team. It was probably like 10 people when I joined, and it got much bigger than that when I left. And one of the things that I kind of took for granted or didn't really realize when I went freelance is that if you don't have those relationships, it's easy to get trapped in kind of this isolated space or put yourself on an island. Is that something that you noticed as a freelancer, or like how do you go about building those relationships, and like how do freelancers get off the island of being just by themselves?
I think it's really tough. I mean, we became closer because I was New Year creative, and I think we just decided to go to the gym together at school, so it was an easy like in there.
Yeah.
We hung out at the gym. We talked about whatever, hockey, like just things around school, and then from there you kind of build that trust, and then you build the relationship and start talking about creativity and whatnot.
I guess it's different for every kind of circumstance. I guess you just kind of back into it from like what you're doing in your life and like how you're spending your time, what groups you're a part of, and you try to navigate it from there. It makes me think that there's this huge gap. Like we talk about networking, and apps like Tinder and Bumble have become so big, and relationships are always going to be a huge category. But I almost think there's this huge white space for developing professional relationships, because it's not LinkedIn. It's clear after a decade of that product being out there, it's not going to be LinkedIn that facilitates those relationships.
Well, it's Instagram now. The amount of
Instagram,
people,
Twitter, all of that.
Because it's like they set, like if you connect with someone, you send their post they made, that's some work you like, and then you send that to them in DM and go, dude, I love this, man. Like, where are you located? Oh, Toronto, man, we should go shoot together. Blah blah blah. You hang out, and hopefully it's good, where like you guys can actually be friends, not just let's make shit together. It's like,
and it's not always going to be a fit. I think that's an important thing to add. Like you meet some people where you're like, I love your work, and then you're like, oh wait, like we couldn't be more different as people, which is important to mention. And then the other thing, I had a meta moment. I had like a very meta moment when you were talking, like making a podcast or just getting yourself out there is a great way. It's a free way, and it's a really easy way to go and say like, hey, we host this thing. If you want to come on and chat, like we've met so many great creative people from this thing that I would love to like get to know better as this thing ends. And like one of the other roadblocks as I'm saying that is that Toronto is also going back into lockdown next week. So like this online to offline thing just doesn't happen when there's restrictions in place. But I'm going to be like, just think about it. I'm so pumped for when like we can do meetups and just say like, hey, if you were on the pod, like let's just come through. We're going to go out to wherever and you should come grab a drink or something like that. It's just so easy.
Exactly. Or even just after the pod, sometimes we'll talk on Zoom with the people, and it's like we talk about the work and whatnot, and then sometimes it veers into like, what's your life like? It's like,
what's going on?
That's so important. I think sometimes we get wrapped up in, just like work. Or
career,
because it's such
Ladder.
a North American thing to do.
Hustle.
Anyways, let's transition here. So I had no idea they were working on I have some kind of...
it was kept under wraps. It was really good. Like no previews, no leaks came out.
Nothing. I wonder when they started on it, because like the work was extensive. Like they did a lot.
This is a multi-month project.
Yeah.
But it also makes me think that part of the reason, riddle me this, is part of the reason why there were no leaks is because the Grammys has dropped in viewership 50%, like both 2 years running now.
Dude,
it was crazy when I saw that. Like nobody, I guess part of it's cord cutting, but nobody is watching the Grammys anymore.
No. You're just watching the content around the Grammys now. That's more interesting.
I couldn't tell you the first thing about who won what at the Grammys this year. I just know that the content was sick.
Yeah. And I mean, I had no idea what was happening. I just saw a story from Jack Benny. He's just like, guys, check out the Grammys tonight. Like, my shit's dropping. I'm like, what?
Whoa.
I didn't even know the Grammys were happening until he mentioned it.
Yeah.
And just to get into the work, what was the first one you saw, and like, what were your initial thoughts? I don't know if you saw.
Well, you were the one that sent it to me, so I didn't see anything before you sent it to me. But I just saw the carousel that he posted, and I was like, oh, this is crazy. I'm going to pull it up because I don't want to speak to it without actually having something in front of me.
Well, I think Gibson only posted like a carousel of like snippets, but what's dope is Jack actually posted like the full videos of a lot of them.
Yeah.
And what they did, man, it's insane the way their 3D work is coming along, because it doesn't feel fake anymore. It doesn't feel like it's so clearly 3D. They've somehow integrated, whether it's just through modeling better or integrating like film grain layers or just overlays that have like make it feel like it's a part of the footage out of camera, whether it's through color grade or layers. And that's what stuck out to me most.
I agree. I think that's a great point. So if you even look, and maybe this isn't the full team, but it's gone from, I think what's most interesting, I try to like look at these things longer than just the piece of content that we're discussing. Like if you look back when Gibson Hazard just started as a we've talked about this before, but he started as a photographer, just doing tour and recap videos for artists, and it was just a team of one. It was just him. So that limits what you can do in terms of the time, the project, what assets you can build. The first time that I think he worked on a bigger team, and this might be just me pulling this out of my ass, but was that Drake recap video when he went on tour with the Migos. And that's when you saw like you had the Scorpion, and you had this kind of 3D scenes built in Cinema 4D or wherever they built it. But now we're seeing this is where it's going. This is kind of where we are today. Now we're seeing that it's Gibson Hazard, a 3D modeler, maybe a texturer, maybe a graphic designer who, he's saying graphic designer modeled the newspaper. And then I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm guessing anywhere between like 7 and 10 people working on this project. And we're really seeing like the 3D has come along a long way. The packaging of mixing video footage with partly 3D, with completely 3D, like all of that is just getting tighter and tighter. And I zoom out a little bit and I say like, wow, if a 10-person team can really nail this and get this done, I'm really excited for like, what does 2 years down the road look like? What does 5 years down the road look like? Because I think technology is doing its job. I've had this conversation with other people though, and about like, oh, it was really easy to learn Photoshop because there was this huge base of tutorials online. You go on YouTube, you could learn any effect you wanted. I think we're going to start seeing the same thing with more complicated software packages like Cinema 4D, like Blender. And what that's going to do, I'm predicting, is that you're going to go from a team of 10 that it takes to produce something like this to even smaller, until one day we get back to that thing where you have this one person, whether it's a Gibson Hazard or whoever comes next, where they can do all the things that 10-person team did. And I'm really excited for what the future of that 3D video space is looking like, because I'm seeing it more. I don't know if it's just me, but I'm seeing it more and more. Like on product drops, like
3D's 100% just it's
crazy.
Everywhere. And I think like Rude said, COVID, that's what's really set this whole industry ablaze.
You can't do production shoots anymore. So like, how are you going to figure out how to tell this captivating story when you can't go on set and shoot with 10 models or whatever it is? Like, you're going to have to be creative.
But it's also a way to fill in gaps where it's like, oh, okay, so we can shoot this stuff on these days in this place, but getting these assets, it's going to be really tough. So you can build scenes, obviously, and embed actual shot footage in those scenes to like fill in gaps that maybe your budget doesn't fill. You can't schedule it. It's just logistically impossible, whether it's COVID or just other situations. But to speak on what you were saying about the team size, I think it either has to get bigger or stay this big no matter what. And I think that's purely based not on what they would be capable of creating with the size of the team. Like the size of the team doesn't matter for what they can make, but more how much they can make. Because if you look at this Grammy drop, they had to do how many videos? I mean, we're only seeing a couple. I'd imagine it's for every single winner, every single nominee.
Yeah. So this brings me back to my days at TSN, where it's like the final product that somebody saw on our page. If we were doing, I'll use like the NHL or NFL awards just as an example. You have one person that wins most valuable player. You have one player that wins defensive MVP. You also have 3 other people that we prep for. So we're talking about hours and hours of design work and creative work where you would only see one graphic out of like the 10 graphics that we made. And that only becomes a bigger problem when you're working with a scale like this, where you have to invest time into making those 3D assets for every artist, knowing that some of those won't get used, even though you put a bunch of effort into it. So I think that's a great point.
And I think the further you go as a Gibson Hazard, he's like the creative mind and director around all this. That's like what the credit is, like director and producer, I believe. It gets to a point where like you can come up with all the ideas and then that's the vision, and then it comes down to execution. A lot
Yeah.
of times execution is a lot of grunt work, and it's like, why
It's
would he
hard and
waste
it's messier than
energy?
people understand. There's so many like half step forward, two steps back. Oh, we ran into this problem. Like it's just so messy.
There's a lot going on, and it's why you have so much energy in a day. Why wouldn't you delegate smaller tasks to people who can like want to learn and like get mentored by you? It's just this trickle down effect, right? This like hierarchical effect that I think these guys have established. Where it gets tricky, and we look at the downsides of doing that, is if you don't constantly practice your craft and you're delegating too much, when do you lose your skill? When do you lose your credibility? Can you come back and actually
Mm.
prove to people and lead by example if all you do is delegate? I don't think that's happening with Gibson. I'm pretty sure he's doing a lot of the 3D, but it's definitely a question to like that arises. You know what I mean?
I also want to point out within like the production process, I'm also seeing that certain elements kind of come in throughout all of the videos. So that's one thing to think about. Like if you're on a project and you're looking to improve quality in some way and how creative something is, and you know that you have 10 videos to produce or you're producing 10 animated sequences, what I think they've done really smartly in this case is that 3D object at the start, it's like an egg and it kind of like unfurls into the horn, and then you kind of go into the horn and then the video comes out. It's much harder to explain. If you saw it, you'd be like, oh, that's what's happening. But that's used in every single one. So that's the time where you're going to be investing a ton of effort up front to really nail that sequence, because that's like the first touch point or experience, and it's really cinematic and it kind of takes you into this world. If you think about where you're investing your energy on a project, and we talked about this off camera before. I think really great, like when you talk about executing a project at a high level, I think the really great projects, what separates them from the good and the mediocre is that throughout the project, you're trying to build with really good ingredients. You're kind of thinking more like a chef than some kind of improvise. How do I say this? I'm choking here. Improvisational.
Yeah,
Holy
you
shit!
got
What a
it.
tongue twister. Like this artist that just has to come up with stuff on the fly. You always want to think about like how can you extend the value of the time and effort and resources that you're putting into something. And I think this is an example where they really nailed that, and they can kind of weave this element throughout, and it just creates consistency and adds production value, which is awesome to see.
And another thing I think that makes this whole like project they completed makes me feel like it's their best work ever, is that Jack Bannon has, or rather Gibson Hazard as well as Jack Bannon, they've always seemed to make content that I watch that seems to lack, you know, it has a lot of depth, but it doesn't have that same like story led through like a person like talking and incorporating like a through line narrative. So what they did, I think
Yeah.
this is the first time I've seen them do testimonials, like a sit down interview, but it wasn't boring. Usually it's fucking boring when there's like a sit down interview. They
Yeah.
nailed the combination of a sit down interview, getting the right questions out, leading the talent through a narrative, and incorporating footage and music and sound effects into this like mash of like creative porn, like where we watch Gibson Hazard and we just think, holy shit, how do you do this? And what's this? How do you transition from there? How do you get that shot, that animation? He mixed all of that in with some sort of through line narrative, like perfectly, no fuck ups. Like you got
Yeah.
to see the personality and the character behind the artist, while also got taken through a creative like whirlwind of like cool effects that weren't forced. Everything felt natural, and it just like brought you into like not just the mind of the talent. So it's like I'm looking at the Post Malone video right now. Like he's a very chaotic performer. The video matches his chaos. I watched the Dua
Yeah.
Lipa one. The video matches her chaos, her pop star sensation, the lights, like everything about it. Like it just mixes perfectly with who these artists are. And it just that's what blew me away. I know it's a fucking tangent, but goddamn, I was just so blown away by this work.
If you had to put, and maybe you could just do zeros, if you had to put a budget on this work, I have two questions actually. So one's the budget. What do you think? How many zeros were on the check? And then the other thing, and I think more importantly, and you can answer these however you want in whatever order, but part of what makes this so good as well is the amount of access they got, right? Like these are A-list celebrities, all of them. They had to get them for, like you said, a sit-down shoot to get that narrative down and this story. Then they also had concert footage. They don't really need them for that, so it doesn't matter. But then also they had specific shots where it looked like these were either semi-staged or directed in some way, with every single artist, which I think is crazy. So how long do you think that they got with each artist? These are the two questions. How long do you think they got with each artist? And what do you think the budget, how much did the Grammys pay for this? Like, what is the budget for this type of project?
I can't even begin to imagine. I'd have to say it's six figures for sure, but just based off the size of their team, and also just the Grammys have a shitload of money. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if it's like $250,000. I also don't know how much they made, because I don't know if they're only sharing their favorites or if, because what I'm watching right now, the content's like, it just says record of the year nominee. It's all these nominees. So there's not just one nominee for each category. So they must have done this for fucking every single category.
You
So
think about it, it's like, oh my God, this is so much work.
So much work. It had to have been like $250,000 plus, just based off the crew size and what the scale of the work was. And when it comes to
and how specialized these people's are, sorry to cut you off, but how specialized these people are. They're just so, like, it's not just somebody who knows how to model in 3D. You're getting somebody who can also texture. You're getting somebody who can also like composite. And then like learning how, and from a management point of view, like how do those pieces connect? If you're the coach, like what pieces are you putting together and when? It's just like so much goes. And when I started this is a bit of a tangent, sorry. When I started out, it was all about the creative, right? Like what's the most inspiring creative thing you can do? What I find is a much more important skill, and something that like I really noticed in you early, is that project management and like actually being able to ship things is almost more important than like what it ends up looking like. If it's on deadline, if it's on budget, if you can manage all of the personalities in the room, like that is a skill in and of itself. And I think it's one that's just getting more valuable. Sorry, back to you.
I agree with, I really like that point, because you have to think how many assets were there. So they had to do like a master board, like whether it's on a Notion page like we have or whatever they use, like how you have to plan the fuck out of this. Like it's like, okay, these are all the deliverables, and then here are all the common assets across deliverables. So let's get all those done first. And then what are unique to each deliverable? Line those out. And then from there, it's like, okay, so we need sound effects is done by this guy. He will like get all the sounds. Then 3D, we need these things. So this guy's going to do 3D. You have to like break it down per role. What's common across all? What can you batch into like a week's work? Like, so you're not task switching. I wonder if they had a project manager who wasn't.
I would have to assume so.
It was probably the producer, which I believe they have somewhere here. It says executive producer Ben Winston, creative director Gibson Hazard, Brendan O'Connor, Jack Bannon, and they have a bunch of other guys. So I'm assuming that Ben Winston was the guy who fucking like kept everyone
made sure everything was moving on time. Such an underrated, underappreciated skill. It's so easy to look at like a construction or renovation project and be like, oh, like there's a lot of logistics and management that goes into this. And I think there's this cognitive gap that we have when we move to something digital, because you just can't see how everything comes together. But it is just as complex, if not more complex, than a project that you could see in the physical world.
Exactly. And I mean, I want to like wrap up on this. Is let's just talk about our favorite piece and like why you like it so much. If you don't have one right now, I can jump in.
Yeah, why don't you start and I'll find mine.
Okay, easily my favorite has to be the Billie Eilish one, and they did work with her before she was huge. It was off her first EP. I forget, it was like a yellow cover with like a slide or something, I forget, but they did her concert shit, and like she just has such a cool, like moody, depressed, like anxious, like feel to her that they just encapsulated in this video so perfectly. Like the VO of her talking about like she can't go to bed at night, she's all freaked out, and then they transition into the house, into the bed as she's saying all this, looking up at the ceiling, talking about sleep paralysis, and all the imagery just perfectly matched with her character and her demons and what she talks about in her music. And furthermore, just like the transitions in this one didn't feel forced at all. Like sometimes I'd watch some Gibson Hazard ones, I'm like, you did that because it's really lit, it's really cool and fancy, but this was like tasteful through and through. Didn't go too crazy, didn't force it in. It was all like properly put in. I mean, I really don't have much else to say. I didn't really take a whole ton of notes, but my biggest takeaway is just how they matched, and I said this before, how they matched the tone and what the person, that artist is, to the way they pace the video, the colors, the effects, and how they like lit stuff. One thing these guys love to do is they do this like strobe effect, and I don't know if it's in post or if it's with the lighting when they do some of the animations slash like interviews. Like they kind of have this like flickering strobe light to some of their lighting techniques, and it just adds this like eerie, creepy, like, I think it also sets up like transitions too. It's very interesting how they seem to shoot almost everything with a transition in mind, and it begs the question of, do they have how this edit is going to look done before they shoot everything, or do they have a rough idea and they just wing it in the editing room? I just wonder that.
One thing I will add on the editing side, and I'm by no means an expert editor in Premiere and just video in general, but I would say that from their work between like so we can call it 2016 to 2018, like you said, a lot of it was this kind of sizzle of, this is what we can do with 3D objects, with thinking outside the box of what a tour video or just a video in general could be. One thing and one area where I think they've gotten really good and really tight and dialed in with is that like just video on video editing. And it's a good question. Like for a lot of this stuff, a lot of the transitions and cuts being made are motivated by motion, either from moving the camera or the subject themselves. And that's just pieced together in a way where it feels so seamless. It feels like you're just moving through a sequence that's very, very intentional. I would say that my favorite of them would either be Dua Lipa or Doja Cat, just because it's like a great example of what I was just talking about. It's just like it's not so over the top. It's not like this kind of alternate world they're creating. It's just like really solid fundamentals. And I would say like more than any other video editor I've seen in the past year, they are the best at that kind of like fast cut, chaotic, super, super quick, almost staccato. If we're talking music terminology, where it's just like there's new information, there's new shots coming at you. It feels like every like 60th of a second, and I think it's just so perfect for in linear television or broadcast, that intro into a segment, and for social it just feels so natural and such a perfect fit. So those two are my favorite. I think they're getting really good at fundamentals, and it's almost blurring the line between what is shot in camera and what has been added or packaged in a way that somebody else couldn't just look at and say, oh, they did this. Like they're so good at hiding what they're doing.
Their fundamentals and their advanced techniques have just in this project blended into the perfect mix. Because I think sometimes before it just felt like, I mean, some of the videos they did the fundamentals and the advanced techniques perfectly as well, but there were probably the majority of them definitely felt like it's lacking the fundamentals, but it doesn't fucking matter because it's so cool. Like it's so brilliant, the advanced, that you can like forget about those fundamentals in pacing or in composition, whatever. These just mixed the perfect balance. Like
chef's kiss.
This shit blew me away, and it didn't blow me away necessarily the same intensity as some of his other work, but it blew me in a way where I'm like, that is good. And I didn't even really notice why it was so good. And I feel like when you don't acutely notice like what's so great about it, that's when you know it's a good video. It's what's his name? Roger Deakins said it best, cinematographer. I said this on the show a million times. The best cinematography in the world is the cinematography you don't notice.
Yeah. They say the same thing about design. It's like the best design is invisible. You can't see it.
It's invisible. You have to really break it down and think and write about it to really understand.
Yeah. I love that. One more thing before we close, and this is kind of like a little bit pie in the sky, big picture thinking, but also really interesting because I'm spending a lot of time working with video game people and just like seeing how 3D is evolving. I want to place a timeline on what we're seeing right now. So in 2020, if we think about where else you're seeing this kind of work, this like caliber of work with the 3D and kind of meshing that with traditional video, I would say if I had to put a label on it, that 2020 and 2021 is kind of the video game cutscene, like those really like cinematic. We watched the Valorant one the other day. We thought was amazing. I think 2020, 2021 is this like video cutscene phase of 3D experiences and like what we're seeing on social, and it's just going to come up more and more on our feeds.
But
If I look just quickly,
Go
if I
ahead.
look 5 years into the future, I think we're going to get into really interesting space where like we've already seen this with the Travis Scott Fortnite concert, where you could be a character in that scene and kind of interact and move around, and it was really like an immersive space. And then I think honestly, I like Facebook is really invested in AR and VR. Obviously, we're not seeing too much of that right now. I think that's kind of in the early stages. But I don't think it's crazy or out of the picture to say, like, by 2025, that's 4 years away from now, are we going to have these, like, fully immersive, continuous, pervasive 3D experiences that we can go into VR or AR and just kind of live these things? It goes, I don't know if you've seen it, but I have friends that are just such a fan of Ready Player One, where you could put on like this suit that gives you haptic feedback and you kind of feel it like it's like a really somatic or like body first experience, and you can kind of like interact in this virtual world just like you would in the real world. That's not tomorrow. That's not something that's a reality or that people could even see on a timeline. But I think this video stuff, kind of like the internet, where one day it was there and it was a huge deal. I think we're going to start to see that with 3D experiences that are going to be always online. It's going to be like a video game where you can just enter in, but it's also fully immersive, and it requires your participation in some meaningful way. And I just think that we're in the early innings of that, but it's just such an interesting space to keep your eye on because, like I said, it's not a thing yesterday, and then a week from now, this is not like the actual timeline, but it'll just come up one day where you're like, oh my God, this is so amazing. I never want to leave this place. This is incredible. And it squares away really interestingly with what we talked about in previous episodes of like, okay, if I really mess with Gibson Hazard in these 3D experiences, how do I buy into that? If I want to invest in a game company or whatever, like, can I buy an NFT? Can I buy some form of ownership where if I'm an early adopter, I get rewarded for that and I get paid for being kind of on the bleeding edge of technology? I just think the space is so interesting. It's something that I'm going to be keeping an eye on.
I'm going to put a pin in that because I want to address what you just said there. But just to go back a sec, where you were talking about like it's now, this is the year where it's happening. It's really interesting. I think video game editors in that montage scene led by FaZe Clan, there were 3D scenes and 3D moments mixed in with gameplay in 2012, 2011, 2012.
Yeah.
And some of
Very
their biggest
early
videos
stuff.
had 3D scenes. And these guys have been in the Cinema 4D game forever at this point, and it's crazy because I almost think Call of Duty gamer culture at that inception stage, that stage of 2010 to around 2014, 15, that's when we saw like what the future of real life video will be. But it's only in the game scene because the mainstream world, the Grammys and stuff, they're still coming around to it, still trying to see, like
Feeling it out.
It's for video games. Like, give it to the kids. It's like, no, that was it. And I want one day there to be an incredible documentary on FaZe Clan, because I think what they've done is they've spawned a generation of creative kids, not just in video games, but around the games itself, that I think to see how this plays out in the next 5 years, like you were saying, it's going to be really interesting. And how many of these kids edited COD videos? How many of them were doing trick shots following FaZe back in the day? That's interesting. To get back and close on this point, on the point you made about like VR and AR, I don't want this is a fucking rabbit hole, but I do want to close on it. Is that I like that idea, but it terrifies me. We're already like what COVID and the quarantine has done. I was talking about this with my girlfriend the other night, and it's freaky. It's like it's completely digitized our experience. No one's hanging out. My girlfriend's an influencer now who people just log into their you could call it a cyberspace, which is just Instagram. They log into Instagram and they look at it and they're like, oh, it's Gina. Like, she's like a character in their life. They may not think of it like that way, but it is. She wakes up and she just goes on camera and just talks to people on this virtual world. That's like the very beginning stages of what I'm scared life may become, where you just wake up and why would you go outside? Shit just gets delivered to your door. You wake up, you put on your fucking suit, you play your video game to relax. Then maybe you go hang out with your friends digitally because, it doesn't make sense to go out in the real world. The real world's, what's the point?
It's easier.
It's way easier to be online. And that, as much as I think that excites me and you, that maybe one day we can have a haptic digital VR or AR experience with the content we consume, I don't think that's net positive. I think it almost like I feel like the government has to regulate, which would never happen, the fact that you can't take it past a certain step. Like we can
Yeah.
go up to here where it's like an enjoyment, it's entertainment, but let's not make this like our life where like work. Dude, going on a tangent. I was listening to Kevin O'Leary talk and he was saying commercial real estate's going to be just like decimated when COVID's like done, because what's likely going to happen, what he's done in a lot of his companies is he's mandated a N95 mask, like you have to wear it in the building, as well as certain departments go in certain days.
Yeah.
So what that means is like, okay, that's the first step he's taking, but what if eventually it turns into you go to work online? Everything's digital. You don't even have to go into the space. Like you're just wake up and you go digital and then you communicate through there. And it's this dull experience where it's like, we get the work done, but we don't want to get sick and like fuck up our future. Like, what if we never get over the coronavirus and we're just trapped in this digital
This is
world?
such a dark way to end on, but I think it's like the other side of innovation. There was no government oversight, no central body. Nobody ever asked like, what happens after we open the Pandora box of social media and these huge networks? Like that question's not going to be asked with VR and AR. We're already starting to see it, I think, really early. And we can kind of close on this, but like how many times, and maybe this is just me, maybe I'm being crazy, but how many articles and things online are you seeing about how AR filters, like these Instagram filters that like they augment you in a way that just takes away all of the imperfections? How much is that impacting young people with like self-esteem issues? We're already starting to see it there. What happens when you can completely change the way you look and interact with the world because you're not a physical person anymore, but there is a virtual avatar that represents you? I mean, like it's a huge question, and I just don't think that anyone's going to consider that until it's actually there, and people are like, oh wait, this is just like a central piece of our life now. Like social media was always just like a fun thing. If somebody had asked you in 2014, or me in 2014 when I signed on to Instagram in grade 10, would have been 2014, and everyone thought it was a joke. Everyone was just like, oh, it's just this thing where kids go to play and hang out on. And now we're looking at, I wouldn't think it's a stretch to say that there's trillions of dollars that move through that platform each day, whether it's influencers, whether it's brand marketing, whether it's advertising. There's so much cash flow that moves through that app. What happens when the same thing happens with VR and we're not prepared? It's just such a huge question to tackle, and also one that I think is like true but useless to ask, because I don't know if you're going to have any kind of intervention at the government level. I don't know who regulates this, and more to the point, the last thing that I want to say before I shut up and get out of here is that the way that these tech companies are set up, if you look at the big 5 tech companies, we talked about this earlier today, like the amount of money they make is more than a lot of countries. And what we're seeing is that the company that figures out VR, AR, advertising, whatever, that is the next like $1 trillion industry, and what value that unlocks. And like these companies are just going to get bigger and bigger. I mean, it's a scary thing to think about.
Horrifying. And when you were talking about AR and like the cameras and whatnot, it made me instantly think of, I can't remember if it was a lecture I was watching. I was shooting for this psychology philosophy teacher, and he was talking about reality only exists the way we consume it because of how our eyes connect with our brain. So we take in light and it gets processed through our eye into our brain and it paints a picture. That's what reality is. And depending on what your eye is, what animal you are, what you are, that's how you perceive the world. Not every animal sees in color. Not every animal looks at a lamp and sees the same thing. Not every animal looks at a human and sees the same thing. There's different perceptions of reality. If you kind of think about it, this is our new eye. Like we are manufacturing and innovating or re-innovating our biology to a point where I wouldn't be surprised. This is creepy as fuck. Our reality is not going to be shaped by our eyes perceiving what reality is, but rather through a lens that we create that can create our own and change our own reality. That's just adding on your point, and that's fucking terrifying because it's not reality, but it is, but it's not.
And just think about how much people invest in social media, like how much of their, I don't want to say self-worth, because I think maybe that's an overstatement, but like how much attention and energy goes into their social media. It's why the last 2 decades have been like aptly named the glass decade, because it's just been staring down at your phone. What happens when the glass decade turns into the virtual decade or whatever comes next? To me, that's a huge question I don't even have answers for. But I mean, I think it's worth considering now before it arrives.
And just a final note, we've said that 10 times, but think about this. I mean, we're inevitably headed to this place where reality will be VR, it will be digital, whatever. And the coronavirus is the quarantine that ensued because of it has quite literally advanced it like tenfold. We have to be digital to survive. So it's almost like we thought this is just something we're going to innovate to out of just pure human innovation and just the desire to be better. But in reality, what if we had to innovate this way to survive? Boom. Mm-hmm. That's it. End of the podcast. Mose, this was great. We kind of got off the rails there.
That went deep. I think that went deeper than and in unexpected directions more than we have ever before. So, I mean, crazy. Yeah. Hope you enjoyed that. Went off into crazy world.
Watch like people stop being friends with us because they're like, these guys are fucking nuts.
These guys are pretty out there.
All right, guys, thanks for watching. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, follow us on everything at Render Repeat Podcast. I don't know why I did that with my hand. Not cool, but you know, we're chilling. We'll figure it out. Talk to you guys next week. See ya.
Love ya. Peace.